Lightning cracked the darkness like a jagged scar across the sky. Rain pelted the window pane in a relentless downpour, each raindrop hitting the glass like a tiny warning. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest within me. As I stood in the dimly lit hall of the mansion that once felt like my cage, I remembered how I died on a night much like this. My name is Lincia and I have lived this life twice. The first time I clung to a loveless marriage with a man who did not want me. The second time, this time, I realized too late that nothing had changed. My husband Li Feng would always choose my sister Lin Xilan over me. But this time I refused to be the pitiful wife who died of heartbreak and despair. On the night of my greatest downfall, in the midst of the howling wind and flickering lights, I faced him and smiled as thunder rattled the ground beneath our feet. "If she is the one you truly want," I said, my voice barely audible over the crash of thunder, "then you should have her. But do not expect me to wait in vain, not in this lifetime." With that final sentence I turned away, stepping out into the storm. I left them behind, Li Feng, Xilan, and my old, suffocating life. Rain soaked me to the bone, but for the first time in 2 lifetimes I felt free. Little did I know the finality of that moment would mark not an ending, but the first step in a journey that would change everything. Again. Chapter 1. The night of my first death. I remember the night I died with painful clarity. In my first life, I was trapped in a loveless marriage, wholly aware that my husband's heart was not mine to keep. Still I hoped, like a fool, that one day he might turn his gaze toward me. The evening had started with a family gathering. My father was presenting a new business partner, and everyone was in their finest attire. My sister, Xilan, wore a flowing silver gown that shimmered like moonlight against her perfect skin. I stood beside her, painfully aware of how plain I appeared in comparison. She was the beloved daughter, the pride of the Lin family. I was the quiet, dutiful child who rarely spoke out of turn. It was during dinner that I first noticed Li Feng's gaze drifting toward Xilan. It lingered on her, like a man entranced by the brightest star in the night sky. Jealousy flared in my chest, but I tried to swallow it down with my wine. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. After all, Li Feng and I were married. He had chosen me, right? Well, a shred of me already knew the truth. Later that night I found myself outside in the garden, arms wrapped around my thin shawl. The moon was brilliant overhead, but it did nothing to soothe the chill in my heart. I had heard them, my husband and my sister, whispering in hushed tones just behind a marble pillar. I couldn't make out every word, but one sentence rang through me like a death knell. "I only married her out of obligation. You know I've always loved you." In that moment my world shattered. I felt something inside me snap, as if a fragile cord tethering me to sanity had been irreparably severed. I stumbled away, tears streaming down my face, the sound of their hushed declarations echoing through my mind like a broken record. The rest of the night was a blur of heartbreak and hysteria. I recall stepping into the road, disoriented and barely aware of my surroundings. A flash of blinding headlights was the last thing I saw before a violent impact threw me across the pavement, blood spilling over the cold asphalt. I felt no pain, only a numb, suffocating sorrow. As my vision faded, I heard the voice of a paramedic, urgent and trembling, telling me to stay awake. Somewhere in the distance I thought I saw Li Feng's face, stricken with horror. And then there was darkness. That was the night I died, broken, betrayed, and believing that no one had truly loved me in my short life. Chapter 2. Awakening to a Second Chance. When I opened my eyes again, I was surrounded by warm sunlight instead of darkness. I blinked, disoriented, expecting the sterile walls of a hospital or the afterlife itself. Instead, I found myself in my old bedroom, one I had occupied as a young woman before my wedding. The pink curtains were exactly as I remembered, the quilt on the bed stitched with small daisies, and even the faint scent of lavender sachets seemed unchanged. My heart thudded. Confusion warred with disbelief. This had to be a dream. Or perhaps this was the afterlife, my personal heaven or hell. Carefully, I touched my arms, the softness of my skin, and then I caught my reflection in the mirror by the vanity. My hair was longer and my face looked younger. I was no longer the exhausted shell of a woman who had just turned 25 and died in a car accident. I looked 19 again. Memories flooded me. My last night on Earth. The bitter betrayal. My fatal collision with that speeding car. None of it made sense, and yet there I was, breathing and alive in my old teenage room. A soft knock on the door startled me. My mother's voice called my name. I had not heard that gentle tone in what felt like centuries. I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet. When I opened the door, there she stood. My mother, hale and healthy, not the frail woman who had passed away from illness years after my marriage. "Sia, it's almost time for breakfast," she said, smiling brightly. Tears filled my eyes. Unable to contain myself, I threw my arms around her, hugging her close. She stiffened at first, clearly startled, then patted my back. "Goodness, what's gotten into you?" I shook my head, attempting to keep my voice steady. "I'm just happy to see you. That's all." She studied me for a moment, her motherly concern evident, but then her smile returned. "Well, hurry and get ready. Your father wants to discuss something important tonight." I closed the door after she left and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Somehow, impossibly, I had been given a second chance at life. I was back before everything fell apart. Before Li Feng and I married, before the accident, before I wasted away chasing a love that was never mine. Still reeling from this cosmic twist, I sat down at my vanity, smoothing a hand over my hair. My eyes met my reflection, wide and fearful but also brimming with an unexpected determination. This time I vowed things would be different. I would not allow the same tragedy to unfold. Chapter 3. A familiar betrothal. Despite my resolve, I soon discovered that the path to changing fate was riddled with pitfalls. That very evening my father gathered the family in the dining room. My sister, Shilon, was perched on a chair with an air of quiet elegance. Even at 19 she radiated confidence. I avoided her gaze, knowing all too well the complicated relationship we would share in the future. Father, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat. "Now that both of my daughters are of suitable age," he began, "I have decided it's time to strengthen our ties with the Li family. They have a son, Li Feng, who has recently graduated with honors from a prestigious university abroad. The proposal is that one of you will be betrothed to him." A quiet hush fell over the table. I could almost feel my heart skip a beat. This was the moment that had defined my entire life before. In my first life, Li Feng had been promised to Shilon initially. But due to some obscure business arrangement, and my sister's sudden desire to back out of the engagement at the 11th hour, I had ended up becoming the substitute bride. That had spelled the beginning of my long, agonizing journey to heartbreak. Yet here we were again. My eyes flickered to Shilon. She wore a mild expression, but there was a subtle tightening around her lips that betrayed her dissatisfaction. I remembered her words from our childhood. She found arranged marriages archaic and restricting. She wanted her freedom, her independence, and ironically I had paid the price for that in the previous life. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the swirl of emotions rising within me. My father continued, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. "The Li family has expressed that they would prefer Shilon as the bride due to her prior acquaintance with Li Feng. However, I wanted to discuss this with the family first." My mother glanced at me with a worried frown. Did she sense my distress? Or was she merely responding to the silence that hung in the air like a thick curtain? "Father," Shilon began, "I am honored by the Li family's proposal, but I'd prefer to decide for myself once I've met Li Feng again. We were friends in childhood, but people change over time." She cast a glance at me, a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. Perhaps she recalled how different I was now, less timid, more resolute. I finally found my voice. "Yes, people do change," I said softly, meeting Shilon's eyes for a moment. "It would be best if we all took some time to think carefully about this. An engagement is for a lifetime after all." My father nodded gravely. "You both have a point. The Li family's welcome dinner will be held next week. You can meet Li Feng then and we will finalize the engagement thereafter." The conversation moved on to other matters, yet my mind stayed stuck on the name Li Feng. His face, older and hardened by betrayal, was seared into my memory. But the Li Feng of this time would be different. Young, hopeful, and not yet wearing the scars of our bitter future. When we finally left the dinner table, Shilon touched my shoulder. "Sister," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "you seem unsettled. Are you all right?" I forced a tight smile. "Just a bit overwhelmed by everything." "I'm fine." She studied me, then nodded. As she walked away, the memory of her stolen kisses with Li Feng in my previous life resurfaced, flooding me with a potent mix of anger and sadness. I had to remind myself, it wasn't entirely her fault that Li Feng loved her instead of me. Feelings were not something one could command. And yet the memory of their betrayal still stung like a fresh wound. I returned to my room, heart pounding. Fate was truly giving me a second chance. I would use it. I would protect myself from the misery that had once swallowed me whole. This time I would not let the Lin family or the Li family's machinations decide my worth. Chapter 4. Preparations and Premonitions. In the days leading up to the Li family's welcome dinner, I struggled to maintain the calm facade I had vowed to project. I spent hours in front of my old diaries, journals I had kept at this age in my previous life. Flipping through their pages, I was confronted with my own naivety. "I hope Li Feng notices me tonight," read one entry, dated just a few months before our wedding in my last life. "I wore the pink dress he seemed to like last time." Reading these lines made me sick to my stomach. I remembered how I had pined for his slightest attention, how I had molded my entire existence around his preferences, only to be discarded when it truly mattered. One afternoon, while I was lost in thought at my writing desk, my mother came in and placed a small velvet box beside me. "This was your grandmother's hairpin," she said gently. "I thought you might like to wear it to the dinner." I picked up the hairpin, a delicate piece adorned with tiny pearls and shaped like a blossoming flower. A bittersweet pang touched my heart. In my previous life I had never worn it. My grandmother had passed it on to me for good fortune, but I hadn't felt worthy of it. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "I appreciate this." My mother hesitated, then reached out to cup my cheek. "Sia, you've seemed distant lately. If something is bothering you, you know you can tell me." Tears threatened to blur my vision, but I blinked them away. How could I explain the labyrinth of memories, regrets, and second chances swirling within me? "I'm just growing up," I said, offering a smile I hoped was convincing. "That's all." She patted my shoulder gently. "All right. Just remember, your family is always here for you." After she left, I returned my gaze to the hairpin, running my thumb across its pearly surface. A swirl of determination rose within me. This was my life to reclaim. I would not relinquish it so easily this time. Chapter 5. The First Encounter. Once again, the Li family's welcome dinner was held at a luxurious hotel. Upon arrival, I found the ballroom bursting with warmth and light. Chandeliers cast golden reflections on every surface, and waiters glided gracefully between the guests. From the corner of my eye, I spotted father and mother speaking with influential business figures, exchanging pleasantries and forging alliances. Xiaolan stood near a grand staircase, dressed in a sophisticated azure gown that complemented her features perfectly. She looked every bit the graceful heiress, poised, elegant, radiant. Glancing down at my own attire, a simple white dress with lace trimmings, I felt a flicker of doubt. But then I reminded myself, no more comparing. This time I would not let insecurities overshadow me. A hush settled over the crowd when the Li family made their grand entrance. My heart pounded. Leading them was Li Feng, the man I had once pinned all my hopes on, now younger by several years than the last time I'd seen him. He wore a tailored suit, and his posture was confident, but there was a gentle, almost uncertain look in his eyes that he had long lost in my previous life. For a moment my throat tightened. This was the man who had destroyed me, the man I had once loved beyond reason. A strange mix of fear and nostalgia tangled in my chest. I forced myself to meet his gaze as he approached. He recognized Xiaolan immediately, giving her a warm, familiar smile. Then his eyes flickered to me, and for an instant I felt the world slow. Did he sense the weight of our history, or was I the only one haunted by those memories? "Good evening," Li Feng greeted politely, extending a hand. "It's nice to meet you both again. It's been years." Xiaolan responded first, her voice bright and welcoming. "Yes, it has. I remember you were quite the troublemaker when we were children." She laughed lightly and he joined her, the sound echoing with genuine warmth. When his gaze turned to me, I mustered a calm nod. "Welcome back, Li Feng." Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. Maybe he was recalling some faint image of me from our childhood. If he sensed anything deeper, his polite smile didn't show it. Dinner was announced shortly after, and we took our seats at an ornate table. The conversation flowed with practiced elegance. Discussions about business partnerships, the Li family's time abroad, and the future alliance between our two families. While Shilon chatted animatedly with Li Feng, I kept mostly silent, occasionally answering queries with short, measured replies. Yet beneath the polished veneer of the social event, tension crackled. A part of me wanted to resent Shilon all over again. Another part of me reminded myself, in this life I had the power to choose differently. I didn't have to let jealousy or heartbreak dictate my every move. Toward the end of the night, Li Feng approached me for a conversation. My breath caught in my throat when he held out a glass of champagne. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed softly, his tone courteous. "Are you usually this reserved?" I hesitated before responding, remembering how in my past life I had tried so hard to be the lively, cheerful wife he wanted, but had never measured up to Shilon's radiance. "I suppose I'm just not in the habit of speaking when there's nothing important to say." He chuckled, taking a sip of his champagne. "That's a refreshing stance. Most people are eager to impress." I studied him, resisting the old pull of my heart. He was handsome, yes, but I knew better than to let that faze me. "I don't have any need to impress you, Li Feng," I answered quietly. "We are just acquaintances at this point." For a split second I thought I saw a flicker of surprise, or perhaps intrigue, in his eyes. Then he nodded. "Of course. I hope we can get to know each other better in the coming weeks. Our families have high expectations." A sense of foreboding coiled in my belly, but I forced a polite smile. "We'll see." With that I excused myself. Looking back over my shoulder, I noticed Shilon had been watching our exchange. Her gaze was unreadable, yet I sensed the faint tension in her posture. Whether it was a spark of competitive instinct or genuine curiosity, I couldn't tell. The night ended with the formal announcement that the Li and Lin families would be entering negotiations regarding the engagement. My father gave a brief speech, praising both Shilon and me as honorable daughters fit to wed into the Li family. My mother offered a congratulatory smile, her eyes glimmering with well-meaning optimism. Inside my emotions whirled. This time I would not leave my fate in someone else's hands. If Li Feng was going to choose Shilon again, so be it. And if he chose me, I would be ready. Because this time I wouldn't blindly give him my heart. Chapter 6. Threads of the Past. The weeks following the welcome dinner were filled with social visits and family gatherings. The Lin and Li families were intent on finding the best match, and Shilon and I found ourselves constantly evaluated, from our demeanor to our education and even our ability to host or organize events. During these visits I remained guarded. I could feel the energy shifting. Sometimes Li Feng would pay more attention to Shilon, drawn to her vivacious spirit and refined intelligence. Other times, his gaze would drift to me as though trying to decipher the mystery of my quiet resolve. It was during one of these gatherings, a formal luncheon at the Lin estate, that I slipped away from the crowd to catch my breath in the garden. My chest tightened with too many tangled memories from my first life. Every time I saw Li Feng and Shilon chat and laugh, it resurrected the old ache of betrayal. Soft footsteps approached from behind. Expecting Shilon or perhaps a well-meaning mother, I turned around only to find Li Feng standing there, his hands in his pockets. "You don't like crowds, do you?" he asked. There was no mockery in his voice, just observation. "I find them suffocating at times," I answered honestly. A faint breeze stirred the flowers around us, carrying their sweet fragrance. He moved closer, his expression contemplative. "Tell me, Lincia, is there something you want to do in life that doesn't involve these stuffy social functions?" I inhaled sharply. In my previous life, I had never shared my personal aspirations with Li Feng. I had been too consumed by the fear of rejection, too eager to conform to his world. But this time perhaps I could allow myself to speak freely, at least a little bit. "I always wanted to learn painting," I said, lifting my gaze to meet his. "When I was younger, I dreamed of studying art abroad and maybe opening a small gallery or studio." I paused, then added, "It's just a dream, though." He tilted his head, a soft smile curving his lips. "Why just a dream?" I shrugged, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Responsibilities, family expectations, you know how it is." Li Feng's gaze flickered with understanding. "I do. My parents expect me to take over the company one day, whether that's what I want or not." In another lifetime I would have reached out to him, tried to empathize with his plight. But now caution tempered my empathy. Perhaps I was jaded, but I couldn't forget how he had chosen Shilon in the end. Before our conversation could deepen, a call rang out from the patio, my father summoning us back inside. Li Feng straightened, looking as though he wanted to continue speaking, but we both knew we had obligations to fulfill. As we returned to the house, I felt my heart pound with a mixture of dread and defiance. Despite myself, I found Li Feng's quiet sincerity appealing. Yet I refused to walk the same path, refused to surrender my life to a man who had once tossed me aside. Even if he had no memory of that betrayal, I did. Chapter 7. Sisterly Tensions. One evening, after a day filled with dress fittings and calls from relatives curious about the potential engagement, Xiaolan found me in my room, hunched over a sketchpad. I had rediscovered my love for art, and in the quiet hours of the night, I tried to capture fleeting moments in charcoal. My mother's smile, the old oak tree in the backyard, the hairpin's delicate curves. "Siya," Xiaolan said softly, stepping inside. I glanced up, surprised to find her wearing a melancholic expression. "Is something wrong?" I asked, setting aside my pencil. She shook her head, then perched on the edge of my bed. We had never been particularly close. Our relationship in the past life had been riddled with jealousy and misunderstandings. Yet in this moment she appeared genuinely vulnerable. "Father's pushing me toward Li Feng," she admitted quietly. "I used to see him as a childhood friend, nothing more. But now everyone expects me to marry him. I'm not sure if it's what I want." A flicker of irony touched my heart. In the previous life, Xiaolan had claimed she didn't want Li Feng, right up until she realized he loved her, and then she took him from me. But I also remembered how deeply she disliked being controlled by our father's ambitions. I forced myself to take a breath, to let go of my own anger. This was a new timeline after all. My sister was not the same woman who had betrayed me. She was still on the threshold of decisions that could shape her life. "It's your choice," I replied, my voice tentative. "If you truly don't want him, maybe you should tell father. You have a right to decide." She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her dress. "It's not that simple. The Lin family is counting on this alliance to expand into international markets. Li Feng studied abroad, he has connections. Father believes our family's future depends on this marriage." My jaw tightened. The interplay of love and business was a cruel game, one I was all too familiar with. "Are you worried about something else?" I asked quietly. Xiaolan hesitated, her shoulders visibly tensing. Then she spoke in a near whisper. "He's changed. The way Li Feng looks at me, it's different from how he did when we were children. Sometimes it feels like he's looking for something in me that I can't give. And then other times I catch him watching you." My heart thumped. "I see." She bit her lip. "Do you want him, Siya?" The question felt like a blow to the chest. I had spent 2 lifetimes wrestling with that very question. "I don't know," I answered honestly, feeling my throat constrict. "Li Feng and I, we're not close. We hardly know each other." A trace of relief flickered in her eyes, but it was tinged with uncertainty. "If you want to marry him, I won't stand in your way." Honestly, I'd be relieved. I stared at my sister, this younger, less jaded version of Xiaolan. Part of me wanted to snap that she would eventually stand in my way, that she had destroyed my marriage in another life. But the memory of my own mistakes held me back. "That's not my decision alone," I said softly, picking up my pencil again to avoid her gaze. "You should figure out your own feelings, Xiaolan. Don't let father decide for you." She nodded slowly, then stood and left. After the door clicked shut, I exhaled shakily, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. No matter how different things seemed, the undercurrents of our complicated relationship remained. I wanted freedom, and Xiaolan claimed she did too. But the question remained. Which of us would be sacrificed on the altar of familial duty this time? Chapter 8. Memories Resurface, Flashback. Despite my best efforts to remain detached, one particular flashback would not leave me alone. Took me back to my first life, to a day shortly after my wedding. The memory played out like a painful silent movie. I stood on the balcony of the Li family mansion, looking out over the manicured gardens. Li Feng approached me, his expression distant. He handed me an invitation, one that asked for my presence at a charity function. But then Xiaolan stepped onto the balcony as well, her face lighting up when she saw my husband. He turned to her with an expression of warmth I had never seen directed at me. They spoke about the upcoming function, about dresses and music, their excitement swirling in the air like confetti. I felt like an intruder in my own marriage. That night, Li Feng had offered Shilon a dance at the ball, his hand resting on her waist as they swayed to the music. I watched from the sidelines, invisible, heart pounding with rage and despair. I remembered the sting of tears on my cheeks as I turned away, the humiliation cutting deeper than any knife. In the present, I woke from that reverie with a start. My heart slammed against my ribcage, sweat beading at my temples. The recollection was so vivid I could almost taste my tears. Even though I was back in my younger body, the emotional scars remained. I forced myself to rise from bed and pace around my room. Dawn was breaking, a faint gray light creeping through the curtains. I caught sight of the hairpin on my vanity, my grandmother's blessing. With trembling hands I picked it up, clutching it against my chest. This time, I whispered to the empty room, I refused to be that woman standing on the sidelines. Chapter 9. A Confrontation of Hearts. One late afternoon, Father summoned Shilon and me to his study. The doors were tall and imposing, the mahogany desk neatly arranged with business proposals and schedules. He wasted no time. The Li family has formally requested that Shilon become Li Feng's fiancée, Father announced, clasping his hands together. They believe the two of you have a special bond dating back to childhood. He glanced at me, a small frown creasing his brow. Of course, there is another possibility, but Li Feng himself seems to favor Shilon for the moment. Hearing those words made my stomach knot. So it was happening again. Li Feng had chosen Shilon, or so it appeared. A wave of bitterness washed over me, but I managed to keep my face neutral. If that is what's best for the families, Shilon said, her tone careful, then I will not oppose it. My father's frown deepened. You don't sound enthusiastic. Shilon lowered her gaze. This is a major life decision, Father. I'm just thinking it through. He nodded, somewhat mollified. Then he turned to me. And you, Sia? Are you disappointed? 1,000 retorts flooded my mind, but I swallowed them. The old me would have sobbed, pleaded, or run away in tears. The new me took a breath and spoke calmly. I have no objections, Father. If Shilon and Li Feng are truly compatible, I support the decision. To my surprise, Shilon's head snapped up. She looked at me with an expression that wavered between relief and hurt. It was as if she had expected me to fight for Li Feng. Perhaps that was what she had grown used to in the previous timeline, or maybe what she unconsciously feared in this one. The conversation ended on that note. Father gave us a paternal nod, clearly relieved that his daughters were not at each other's throats. As Shilon and I stepped out into the hallway, the tension between us thickened. Are you really okay with this? She finally asked, her voice low. I nodded. If that's what you want, then yes. She studied me, confusion clouding her features. I don't understand you anymore, Sia. You used to be so. So what? I prompted. She shook her head, lips parting as if searching for the right words. Passive, she finally said. You never stood up for yourself. You never had your own dreams. Now you've changed. I see you painting at night, refusing to pander to Li Feng's attention. A strange pang tugged at my heart, part pride, part sadness. I've just grown up, Shilon. She let out a small, shaky breath. Sometimes I envy you now. You found a sense of purpose. I don't know what I want yet. I tried to muster a reassuring smile but failed. We were both caught in the webs our father and society had spun for us. The difference was I was now armed with the knowledge of how badly this path could end for me. And I was determined not to repeat that fate. Chapter 10. The Day He Chose Her. A week later, the Li family hosted a private luncheon where the announcement was made official. Li Feng and Shilon were to be engaged. The news circulated among the guests, smiles and polite applause rippling through the room. I stood by, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to keep them from shaking. Li Feng looked handsome in a charcoal suit, and Shilon radiated elegance in a soft lavender gown. They posed for photos, champagne glasses raised in toasts. My father beamed with pride, and my mother dabbed at her eyes, her emotions overflowing at the sight of her daughters stepping into adulthood. I had rehearsed in my mind how I would react. Thought I was prepared. Yet when I saw Li Feng slip an engagement ring onto Shilon's finger, a wave of memories nearly bowled me over. My own wedding band slipped onto my finger by that same man in another life. In that moment it felt surreal and cruel. I took a step back, blinking away tears. No, I reminded myself this was a new beginning. I had wanted him to choose Shilon if that was his genuine wish. I wouldn't be tethered to a loveless marriage again. I was free. As if sensing my presence, Li Feng turned and locked eyes with me across the crowd. His expression was unreadable. For a brief, confusing second I thought I saw regret. But it made no sense, he had made his choice. I turned on my heel and slipped away, heading for the secluded patio overlooking a tranquil pond. Leaning against the railing, I stared at the water lilies floating on the surface. So peaceful, so serene. Nothing like the turbulent emotions roiling within my chest. Congratulations, I whispered to myself, trying to rid my tone of bitterness. You're free, Lincia. You can live for yourself now. Yet a single tear escaped and slid down my cheek, the hollow ache in my heart a stark reminder that I still cared, maybe too much. But I refused to crumble like I had in my previous life. This time I had a chance to shape my destiny. Chapter 11. This time I was the one who left. 2 days after the engagement luncheon I made a decision. I gathered my courage and approached Father in his study. The lines of worry across his forehead seemed etched deeper than ever, a sign of his constant battles in the business world. Father, I began, forcing my voice to remain steady, I wish to study art abroad. He looked up from his papers, surprise evident in his eyes. Abroad? Where did this come from? I swallowed hard. It's something I've always wanted. Now that Shilon's engagement is settled, I see no reason why I can't pursue my education. I'd like to apply to an art school in Europe, maybe France. His brows furrowed and for a moment he seemed at a loss. But, we've never discussed this before. I steeled myself. I know. But I'm telling you now because I need to live my own life. There was a long silence. I could almost feel his mind whirring, calculating the pros and cons of letting his younger daughter chase an artistic dream. Finally, he sighed heavily. If it's what you truly want, then I won't stop you. But this is an important decision, Sia. Relief washed over me like a cool breeze. It is, Father, and I promise I'll make the most of it. He nodded, a hint of sadness in his gaze. Very well. We'll speak with your mother and make the necessary arrangements. I bowed my head respectfully, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. This was the freedom I had craved, the chance to break away from the cycle of heartbreak. I left the study, a newfound lightness in my step. Outside in the corridor I ran into Li Feng. He seemed genuinely surprised to see me, and for a moment he looked as though he might speak. Then he hesitated, as if remembering he was now engaged to my sister. Sia, he finally said, his voice soft. I heard you're planning to go abroad to study art. The knowledge that he had already heard the news startled me. Perhaps my father had confided in his soon-to-be son-in-law. Yes, it's something I've decided, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. He nodded slowly, something akin to regret flickering in his dark eyes. I see. I hope it makes you happy. I inhaled deeply, forcing a calm smile. Thank you. I hope so too. For a moment we stood in silence, both of us grappling with unspoken words. Then I turned and walked away, determined not to look back. This time I would be the one to leave first. Chapter 12. Farewells and Beginnings. The day of my departure arrived with a swirl of emotions. My suitcases were packed and lined up in the foyer. My mother was tearful as she fussed over my belongings, ensuring I hadn't forgotten anything. Father gave me one last paternal lecture about taking care of myself in a foreign country. Shilon stood quietly off to the side, arms folded over her chest. She was radiant as ever, her engagement ring gleaming under the foyer's chandelier. But there was a dullness in her eyes, perhaps the weight of her own uncertainties. When our gazes met, she stepped forward. So this is it? You're leaving? I nodded, trying to keep my composure. Yes. I'm sorry for springing it on everyone so suddenly. She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. No, don't be sorry. You have a right to chase your dreams. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, as if trying to bridge a gap that we both knew was still there. Father cleared his throat to indicate it was time for me to leave, and a somber hush fell over us. I headed for the car waiting at the curb. As the driver loaded my luggage, I stole one last glance at the mansion, the place where so many of my past hopes and sorrows were bound. I exhaled softly, feeling a mix of relief and yearning. Just as I was about to climb into the car, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I found Li Feng slightly out of breath. It was the first time I'd seen him since our last exchange in the corridor. "I heard you were leaving today," he said, voice trembling with a subdued intensity. "I wanted to say goodbye." For a moment the memories of my first life overwhelmed me. Our bitter arguments, my death in the rain, the heartbreak that had defined my very existence. Yet here he stood, a man on the brink of a future I would no longer be part of. "Thank you," I replied, my voice catching. I managed a final, wavering smile. "Goodbye, Li Feng." He opened his mouth as if to say more, but I gave the driver a nod, and the car door closed behind me with a gentle thud. As the engine revved and we pulled away from the estate, I felt tears burn my eyes. But I wouldn't break down. I had chosen this. I was finally free of the cycle that had bound me to heartbreak in my previous life. Epilogue. Seeds of Tomorrow. Months later, I sat in a small studio apartment in the heart of Paris, the aroma of fresh croissants drifting in through the open window. My easel stood by the window, brush strokes capturing the dawn light as it filtered through the narrow streets. In the corner of my studio, a single hairpin gleamed, the heirloom I had brought with me from home. Sometimes I'd pick it up, close my eyes, and remember who I used to be. A woman trapped by fate, clinging to a man who could never love me. But now I was an artist forging a new path, painting the dawn of a life I never thought possible. I heard from my mother through letters that Xiaolan and Li Feng were planning a grand wedding. She included photographs of them at social events, where they appeared the picture of a perfect couple. Yet my heart did not twist with jealousy this time. I felt something softer, a quiet acceptance, perhaps tinged with a hint of sadness. "We cannot undo the past," I thought as I dipped my brush in a swirl of rich purple pigment. "But we can write a new future." The watery colors merged on the canvas, forming the shape of two silhouettes beneath a stormy sky. A symbolic image of the girl I once was and the life I had left behind. No matter what regrets lingered, I would move forward. And so I painted through my pain and my hope. Each stroke of the brush was a testament to the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak that had nearly destroyed me, the second chance that saved me, and the final fateful decision to walk away. Though I still woke some nights remembering the echo of thunder and the feel of cold rain against my skin, I no longer felt paralyzed by it. Instead, I saw it as a reminder that storms passed and dawn inevitably came. I saw it as a reminder that I was not the same Linxia who had died in despair. I was someone new, someone who had discovered the courage to leave first, to carve out a destiny that belonged to me. Perhaps one day I would return to my homeland, my family, and face Li Feng and Xiaolan with a smile free of resentment or fear. Until then, I would remain here, in a city brimming with art and infinite possibility, sowing seeds for the woman I was still becoming. Yes, regrets might linger forever in some hidden chamber of my heart, but so would the gentle promise of tomorrow. A tomorrow where I chose to love myself first, above all else. And that, I realized, was the truest form of rebirth.